Getting stories from the edge where the healing begins.
Welcome to another episode of the Old Paratroop Podcast, a podcast where we talk to a wide variety of guests from all walks of life with their fascinating life stories, all for raising awareness for mental health in the military, veterans community and the emergency services community. If you haven't already, please go to the YouTube channel and the Instagram and give me a follow. I appreciate it. It helps more than you realise. Without further ado, today's guest, former SAS, author, actor and motivational speaker, Mr. Colin MacLachlan. How you doing, Colin? All right?
Yeah, morning. You all right?
Yeah, really good. Thank you. Thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it when you guys make time to come on and have a chat with me on the podcast. It's really, really appreciated.
Pleasure.
Good stuff. Well, like all the podcasts, I like to start at the beginning. It seems like the best place to start. Get a bit of a background about yourself, where you grew up, what you were like at school, and then ultimately what led you down the road into the military. Yeah, so over for you. Where are you from, Colin?
Yeah, so I, like a lot of people that end up in, particularly the infantry, I had quite a sort of troubled childhood, a bit of a broken home as such. There was a lot of violence and stuff like that, and I didn't really have a perspective. I didn't have anything to compare it to. I stayed in a little row, like a few houses with a little row of cottages, and so there wasn't any other kids my age, and so sometimes you become just a product of your environment. So I just, that was my normal. It was normal to come home, have all these chores to do. If the chores weren't done perfectly, I had to go into the kitchen, bring my mum or my stepdad the instrument that was going to be used on me for the next period, and that just became normal. And I think when you normalize violence in that way as to a young person, it does things. It just switches buttons on and off in terms of normalizing trauma, normalizing violence, becoming quite unemotional when it comes to that stuff. And so that was kind of my experience as a sort of 12, 13, 14-year-old. And although I was okay at school, I was bright enough. I think for anybody that knows you can only do as good at school as how good your home life is. And if your home life, there's stuff going on in whatever area, then it affects school life. And that was the same for me. And so I got a bit kind of distracted at school with everything that was going on at home. We had social workers, children's panels, NSPCC round. The social workers would come at the house until they got beaten up at the house, and then they had to come and see me at school. And if they're coming into class, pulling you out of the classroom, it can only interrupt and be a distraction from school. So it's funny, I was literally just down last week at an academy talking to teachers about the influence they can have on a young person, particularly when a young person doesn't have a lot of positive male and female role models in their life. And I was quite lucky at that I had neighbours that were quite proactive in getting people involved. I had teachers that were quite brave back when it wasn't part of their job, and there was a lot of there was a lot of kids that would get battered, back in those days. But to put your head above the parapet and bring in social services and stuff was quite a brave thing to do for a teacher. So I always say never underestimate that influence and positivity you can have on a young person and shifting their trajectory from a poor path to a good one. And I remember getting dragged away at 4 o'clock in the morning by, I think it was 2 guys from the NSPCC, and I was taken away to a doctor's and stripped, and then they took pictures of me from each side. Wow. And then they kind of used that as evidence. And one of the big things that was, I remember this now from being a big deal back in the day, was I had this like fractured eye socket, my eye was closed over, and they could prove beyond reasonable doubt that was made with a closed fist. And that was the deciding factor that would decide whether I would be sent to a home, because back then you could hit somebody with an open palm, you could belt them, all the rest of it. The bruises, I used to be tartan from like my lower back down to the backs of my legs. And so I wouldn't do like PE at school, because at PE you had to if you did PE, you had to go and take a shower. So I had to strip. So I never wanted to get into my PE kit or get into the shower because people would see what I looked like. But there was one year we had to do cross country and you had to take a shower. And when I walked into the shower and everyone left, and then the PE teachers came in and said, you need to come into the office. And I had to raise my shirt. And then that's when social services and got brought in. And so I had to go to these panels and stuff. And I remember that closed fist thing was a thing. That's what would be the deciding factor that would send me to home. But I just lied when I went into the panel and said that I fell downstairs because my little sisters were just born at that time. And I thought, if I go to home, that's me, I've escaped, I've run away. My little sisters have got to try and get through this. And albeit they had a different childhood to me, I didn't know that at the time. So I thought, I'm going to have to stick around and make sure they're okay because I knew I'd be older and stronger and I'd probably be able to look out for them at that age, even if I couldn't do that for myself at this age. So there was probably different things going on that kind of sowed the seeds for, protection and military a lot later on. But I never wanted to join the army. I was really small, young, quite wiry, and it scared me, the idea of going to the military. But I was dragged along to the careers office and said you've got to be out the house by the time you're 16. So I went along to the careers office and joined the infantry 2 weeks later as a 15-year-old.
Wow, it's I do hear a lot of stories like similar to yourself of varying degrees of sounds. I'm not going to lie, sounds horrific. You go back sort of 60s, 70s, 80s, smacking kids was kind of acceptable. I was smacked as a kid, but there's being smacked as a kid, and then there's obviously blatant abuse there, which that was. And how, if you don't mind me asking, how has that kind of affected you moving forward? Because for some people, I always say we're all different. Kind of certain things can affect people, and you carry it through. Is that something you've carried through into adult years, or is it something you've kind of put to bed? Or
Yeah, I think parts of it, and so I've tried to take the I've tried to take, and I always say to people, no matter what sort of experiences you've had, and they might be negative, you can always use that as a positive experience. So because of my experiences as a child, my children will never experience physical abuse or even verbal because I know how it stays with you, and it stays with you for life. It's like how they, when you hear stories about some of these elephants that when they're very small, they're treated really badly as small elephants, and they remember it. So even when they're massive elephants, these little guys with sticks who just control them because that's all they remember from being a young elephant, even though they're massive and could just trounce them at any moment. So I think I'm probably a better dad, a better friend, a better partner because of all the negative experiences I've had. So whether they're positive experiences or negative, you can always use them to, that I know I'm definitely not going to be like that. We've had it with friends, managers, colleagues, in the military and everything else, that you have positive ones where you think, do you know what? I like the way he dealt with that or whatever. And I'm going to
yeah,
try and be more like that in a command position or with teammates or whatever. But you can also have that with negative experiences. So I'm definitely not going to be like that, or and so I'm exactly the same. And so I use some of those negative experiences to inform myself of how I definitely don't want to be like that, And so anybody can take that. Anybody can take those negative experiences and just inform themselves of, that's not how they're going to be.
yeah, I think that's a very important point that you've come there to obviously you turn the negatives that you had into a positive, and it's like almost a of what not to be like kind of guide, and I think that's a really, really good point. I think people will kind of hopefully recognize that as well. So at what age did you, because obviously you said it wasn't on the agenda for the military, but you kind of ended up going down the route. Did you see that as an escape then and think, right, that's the way I get out of kind of sort of where you're from in the background and stuff like that?
Yeah, and I think I joined the army at 15, and I virtually never saw my parents again. And so it was yeah, it was an escape. It was exactly that. It was, although it was a different life, it was hard. It wasn't what I wanted. it was better than how I was living before. I had freedom to some extent. And if you think of the freedoms you have as a 15-year-old in the military, that's not saying much, but it was freedom for me, you know. I could go to bed safe at night, you know, and as long as I did what I was told, which was arguably less than what I was being told to do back at home, it was a breeze, you know. So people were complaining about ironing their kit and bed blocks and, you know, going out on runs and having to be up early in the morning. You know, that was my life. I could do that standing on my head. And arguably, I take that in a smaller concept there and transfer it to much later within the regiment where, you know, you've got to, I mean, any selection course, any hard course within the military, of which selection's just one of a many, you have to be able to suffer and endure to an extent. So whether it's P Company, the Marine course, a hard course within the military, or selection, you have to have that ability at some stage to be able to suffer, to endure. And it's the ones that do better that can suffer and endure more than other people that get through the other side. And you know exactly what I'm talking about through P Company and everything else. And selection is just another course the same as that.
Yeah, I can relate. I do relate to what you're saying there with basic training and kind of, and you do see varying levels of people that you know, you'll remember them times when you stood in the corridor on parade and they're literally talking you through how to shave, or they're showing you how to plug an iron in, for example. And I always say that I was the same as you there, because my father was rather disciplined in a good way, not obviously extreme, but he was, you know, disciplined. We had rules. I always said basic training was really easy because it was just like, it was easier than being at home with my sergeant major of a dad. And he was never in the military. But so obviously you joined up, and for the viewers and the followers that are watching this, what unit did you decide to join, and what was your reasoning for joining that?
Yeah, so I didn't specifically pick the Royal Scots. When I was in the careers office, you had to do this like tick test. And I did the tick test and I must have done really well because he said, man, that's like, you know, I had this high score. I think it equaled the highest score they'd had at like Bathgate careers office. I said, you can join virtually whatever you want. And I looked around the careers office, and at that age, you don't know anything about the military. So you're looking at pictures. And I'm looking at all these pictures, and there was a guy, he was all tanned, he had a short sleeve blue shirt on, and he was abseiling down this radar dish in Hong Kong. And I'm like, wow, that looks like mega. I said, I'll be that guy. And I still remember it now as a young 15-year-old kid. The guy said, oh, that's an RAF systems telecommunications systems analyst operator. Now, I still remember that title now to this day. That's how important it sounded as a 15-year-old kid. And I said, yeah, I'll do that. And he said, well, it's a year's waiting list and then it's 2 years training. And my mum said, nah, he's got to be out of the house by the time he's 16. So I joined the Royal Scots 2 weeks later as a 15-year-old. And the Royal Scots were like a kind of Edinburgh Central Belt infantry unit, one of the oldest infantry units in Britain, right back to 1633. And they've since become one Scots when they emerged with the KOSB. Then they were Ranger Battalion, so they were the ones with the big Thunderbird cap badge on now. So they've kind of changed names a few times, but that's what I joined back then, and that was back just before kind of the first Gulf, that sort of 1990 period, and that's the unit I joined first.
Yeah, I do know. I've had dealings with the Royal Scots. They were on the same campus too, Para, back in the early 2000s. So we've had a few incidents in town, in pubs, as you can imagine. But no, I have a lot of respect for a lot of the units out there, and I think working outside the military gives you that kind of, you know, I work, when you're in your own unit, you become a little bit brainwashed. But I think after I left working in the industries I did, I've worked with a lot of units. So you kind of see good and you see the bad, and you realize that there are units out there and stuff like that. So it is going to have a lot of respect. So yeah, Royal Scots, how did you find basic training? Like you've said there that, you know, compared to a lot of people, it was easy. But what about the fitness side? Have you always been into your fitness?
I was always quite low. So CV wise, and obviously the infantry's slightly different to maybe other units, certainly the Americans, where it's less on how much weight you can lift and it's how fast you can run, particularly in the infantry unit. So the Royal Scots, it was more about, you know, your BFT, which in the grand scheme of things in the military doesn't actually mean that much.
No.
But there's very few times we're in the old PT vest, like running a mile and a half in our flip flops. That's the military's very different to that. But that's how fitness was measured back in the day. Your BFT time. So I was quite light anyway. I was built like the gable end of a fiver, so I could sort of run these 8-minute BFTs and stuff,
Yeah.
and I could probably maintain 5-minute miles for about 5 miles from when I joined probably by the time I was about 16, through till about, I don't know, 36. So my CV was always okay, but I was quite small, I was quite light. And so I was okay at that stuff. So I'd play football on the wing. I was a kind of lightweight boxer. I was quite lightweight, but I never sort of joined like that. I was quite sort of mediocre when I joined, but I grew up quite quick. So I was one of the poorest soldiers in terms of being a soldier, and the barrack room I was okay at. But I was sort of really middle of the pack. And by the end of that year, I went to GIB Houston down at Newcastle. So you had 18-year-olds on there who are like almost like they seem men to you. I was just a 15-year-old kid. And so there's a big difference between a 15-year-old and an 18-year-old. Now,
Absolutely.
like a 35-year-old and a 38-year-old, there's not a lot of difference. But as a 15-year-old and an 18-year-old, it was quite a big difference. So I had to grow up quite quick, and I sort of did that. I had quite a steep learning curve, so that by the end of that year, there was two of us up for best infantryman, and I was nowhere near that. I'd have been bottom third of like a soldier when I first joined, but by the end of the year, there was two of us. I still remember his name, Bannerman. He was a Gordon Highlander, a great soldier, but a unit, big unit. And we had this sort of soldier off, if you like. So you had to do all your soldiering skills, you were thingied on it, and then you had a range, and you had to go down this range. You could pick whatever terrain you wanted to go down, and there was targets. Things like 20 targets. You had to hit the targets as you go down. So there was high ground, which you could see more, but you were kind of silhouetted, and then there was the really low ground in the stream. And we both know, Chris, that the correct answer is always get in the stream. So,
So,
so I was in the stream. And every now and again, I'd put my head up, shoot a target, and I'd come along. So it got to the end of it, and to my amazement, Bannerman had taken the high ground and just silhouetted himself the whole way. I'm like, right, it's a done deal. This is mine. And the DS went. He was I think he was the colour sergeant. You got junior rank, and I was like a private. I was like a Tom, and they said, well, Bannerman had clear eyes on the target the whole time. You were hidden because you went into the stream at times, so you couldn't see the targets, and so he got the prize. And from
no.
very early on, as a 16-year-old boy, I realised that it's not all about the soldiering. It's about how people see you, and that was probably a good learning curve for me as an early kid, because even though I knew deep down in myself, you made the right call. You got in the stream, you were hidden, you took the best terrain. Whether it's the right call or not, it's always going to be in the eyes of the beholder. So that's good for anybody, just to remember that just because you do something and someone doesn't see, someone doesn't recognize it, doesn't mean it was the wrong thing to do or you weren't right at the time. So that was quite a useful learning curve for me as a young kid, which would stand me in good stead for much later on courses and selection. Because selection, I was just a Royal Scot. I wasn't from any big unit. I wasn't a great soldier. I was pretty average, middle of the pack. But I think I was a good team player, and I think I was, I was hardworking, quite selfless, and I think the DS and other people within the patrol probably saw that. And you also need a bit of luck on these things as well, staying injury free and stuff. So, yeah, it was a good learning curve for me as a young kid.
Yeah, absolutely. I can relate to them cold, sort of crawling through streams and stuff through depot, and it always seemed to be in February or one of the cold, didn't it? I mean, yeah, good times. Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, you know what you said there about kind of, which obviously will come on to selection shortly. But you know, when I used to see sort of soldiers that were fit, and I had this conversation with Des Powell and a few others. So I looked at these people that went on selection and thought they are amazing soldiers. I knew them; they'd just come back from depot, full screws and stuff like that, and then they'd come back and failed, like you say, maybe through injury, through just not wanting to do it or jacking or whatever. So that was always an off-putting thing for me. I used to look at these and always used to think I'm nowhere near as good as them. And it's probably the wrong way to look at it. Like you've just cemented that point. You was an average soldier, but you had these qualities that obviously work for selection, didn't you?
Yeah, it's a really good point, Chris, because sometimes we fall into that thing of trying to measure ourselves against other people. And so I'll give you some good examples. In the Royal Scots, we had a really good soldier, a good friend of mine called Cookie, Morgan Cook. He was a great soldier, recce platoon. You know, if you had this idea of what a soldier would be, using a sniper, you know, he topped the class, sniper class and all that, it was Cookie. And everybody was like Cookie. And Cookie went away on selection and he failed the jungle, right? And for whatever reason, personality clashes and all sorts. He was quite strong, opinionated, which you can't really be. You've got to be the grey man on selection. But for whatever reason, he failed the jungle. But regardless, he was a great soldier. If anything, a better soldier than me. I went on selection with this guy called Chris Busby, and he won't mind me mention his name. He's a great friend of mine. I could run 5 minute miles. I was a decent runner, right? I was fringes of our regiment cross country team because we had some whippets, and even I was like fringe, team. Chris Busby was like British triathlete. Like he had the lungs of a racehorse, massive lung capacity, and his cycling and his running was on another level. So when I was training, I would try and run with him, and I couldn't live with him. And you think about it, I could run 5 minute miles. I couldn't live with him. He was just not even breathing. He had he was just gliding. And so I went on selection with Chris Busby. And of course, everybody thinks it's just fitness, isn't it? So everyone's like, Chris has got a chance. Colin, no chance. Maybe last a couple of weeks, blah, blah, blah. Chris will fly it. And I think Chris lasted 2 weeks. And I might be doing him a disservice. He might have lasted more or less. I can't remember. But Chris was relatively short. He came off on the aptitude phase. And he went back, and that must have shattered a lot of people because Cookie, this ultimate soldier, had failed. Chris Busby, who was probably one of the fittest in our unit, he could have looked out of place in a British triathlon team, failed after a couple of weeks. And there was Colin, the average soldier away. But when I passed, it had the opposite effect because everyone's like, oh my God, Colin passed. If Colin can pass, put my name down. And so everybody was going on selection after that. I'd have all my mates staying at my house, and I'd be telling them how to train and practice for the routes. And we were unlucky. We never got anybody through, but we had some great soldiers, people that were better soldiers than me, far fitter. And, sometimes selections just, it's not about that. It's not about the fittest. It's not about the best soldier. It's something else. And, resilience has got a big part of that. That's probably one of the little things that I had in my armory that would help me.
Yeah, resilience and mindset, and obviously you come from your background, and I hear this a lot of people that are successful on selection, and I know a lot of people that serve in 2-2 that from my unit, as you probably expect, and across the board. But it kind of, yeah, I do. Their upbringing seemed to be very, very similar, and like you say, you take the positives away from that. Then obviously it created that resilience, it created that kind of stoic kind of attitude and stuff like that. So yeah, I get that. So how long did you do in the Royal Scots before you thought, right, I've kind of got to a point now, I'm going to have a go? Because obviously you've got a small window, and this is what people probably don't understand. Obviously selection is very, very hard on your body. Obviously I've never done it, but I obviously know a lot about it. So you're going late 20s or early 30s, you're kind of running the risk of injury. So when was your decision then to go, right, this is me, I'm going for it?
Well, I never really, much like the military, I never really set my eye out and was like, "That's me. I'm going for selection." I wasn't surrounded by people. I think if you were from the paras or Marines, you probably had an idea of what selection was about. You had colleagues that had went away and passed or came back. They knew the format of selection. We didn't have anybody, I think, in the regiment at that time, or we certainly hadn't had anybody passed in about, I don't know, maybe 20 years or something like it. It'd been a long time before we had anybody that had got through. So I didn't really know anything about selection. And I did a thing called the close observation platoon in the infantry where you're kind of hiding in bushes and think you're sneaky beaky and stuff. And then that's when you come across the regiment. So I came across them then on the COP course and then across the water. And then I also, there was an SAS instructor down at Brecon. And I did I don't know if you, I can't remember, it's like the 2 miler or 3 miler or something you do. And a lot of the para-reg guys were favourite for it. And I beat them. I beat them in. I was okay at running with weight as well. And there was a guy there. In fact, the sort of chief instructor, if you like, the head of it, was a kind of famous para-reg guy, Baz Bardsley. He's like a legend from the Falklands and stuff. And I think he'd had a word with a couple of people, and that's what kind of I saw what it was about. And then Ireland with the COP, I kind of had an idea of what their job was. You know, we thought we were doing the sneaky beaky stuff, but these guys were doing the real stuff. And so I put my papers in and I spoke to like Cookie, who had a good idea. He'd probably got further than most people had got from the Royal Scots. And so I'm quite thankful to Cookie because he prepared me quite a bit for things like the aptitude phase and then later on in the jungle and that set me up for success. I guess so. I was really young, and I joined the army young. I was 15. I only went on selection. I was 23, so I'd probably done 8 years in the Royal Scots. But 23 is really young to go on selection. You're normally closer to around 30. And I guess all the things that you have throughout the infantry, the wear and tear and stuff like that, maybe I was fortunate. I didn't have that because I was still 23. I could recover quickly. And so one of the things for me was if I would roll an ankle, twist a knee, or I'd get a blister, I was all right with it. I was all right being uncomfortable. I could recover. I could go again the next day. Whereas if you're quite finely tuned, like the Chris Busbys of the world, a sprain, a knock, a roll can really, that's you. You're out the game, you know, because I guess you're too finely tuned, you know. And so I was quite robust that way, even though I was still quite a small, skinny kid. I was quite robust. So all the wee rubs and blisters and twists and stuff I was able to recover from. And yeah, I got fortunate, you know, and yeah, managed to come through the other side. And one of the things I've learned recently from, you know, writing the book and stuff is that you can't give numbers, although numbers are probably already out there, but I'm allowed to say 6% finished the course, so people will have an idea of numbers. But yeah, there was 6% passed hours, and I was lucky. I was lucky to be one of the 6% left at the end. But like you've touched on, Chris, resilience is a big part of that.
Yeah, 23 as well. I'm surprised. Obviously, with my unit at the time, they could not turn you down, but they'd advise you not to go on. And like you say, I think the kind of given was that you went away and you at least done junior record to put you in good stead. Obviously, the fitness on juniors is quite intense. Or they'd gone and done a stint at depot with the recruits because again fitness, and then they come back, honed all the skills, and then gone so to go on at 23 and pass is yeah, it's pretty incredible, really, if I do say so myself.
Yeah, and a lot of people pass second time round because I think they have an idea of what it's about, how to train, they know the routes, and they can prepare themselves. They know where all the little rubs, and until you've been there, you don't know. You don't know what you don't know. And so all those little rubs, nicks, all those little, I don't know, maybe it's navigation errors or maybe it's just luck, like you've injured yourself. All those things can be ironed out the second time round. I was lucky. I got through first time round, but I didn't have any major injuries. But, you know, they're easy to get, and it was that's why I always say fortunes fortune's a big part of it, but resilience is probably the biggest, because everybody that was on selection was fit. Most of them were decent soldiers, but resilience was probably the one thing that, if I was to look at the 6% that passed, you wouldn't give us a second look, but the resilience was the one thing that we were always going to keep going, until someone dragged us off. For us, it was never a volunteer course. It was always a course attended. I'm here until the end, so may as well just suck it up. Whereas when you have that mentality that you're a volunteer and you can come off at any time when it becomes uncomfortable, they're two different mindsets,
Yeah, it's I mean, I think it's no secret that selection consists of, 3 parts: a hills phase, a jungle phase, and then the escape and evasion phase at the end. So for you, because I always find this fascinating about, I hear people go, oh, once you've got out the jungle and you've got to the E&E phase, it's almost a given. And then I hear other people that go, no, for you, which part of selection, if you don't mind me asking, did you think, wow, this is the toughest part,
So I'm probably going to contradict myself, but everyone will tell you something different. But I think generally the hardest part is the jungle, because in the jungle you've got to be fit, but you've also got to be a good soldier and a good bloke, because you're in a very confined environment. You're under microscopic scrutiny. You can't be the DS watcher because people are watching all the time. So you've just got to be a team player, and but your infantry skills, your navigation, wet and cleaning, wet and handling, firefights, all that's got to be top notch. And so I think the jungle is the hardest phase. For me personally, the hardest was probably the first week, because I'd always gone away in these external courses and I'd been okay. Fitness was fine. I was decent. I'd learn quick, like you have to in the army. You have to learn new skills quickly, forget them, learn the next one. You're regurgitating courses as you kind of go through. Selection was the first week when I felt like out my comfort zone. We'd go on runs. I wasn't even middle of the pack. We'd go on thing, and I'd be like, wow, I am a small fish in a big pond. And so I just had to stay with it. And sometimes that's all it is, stay with it. If I'd have judged myself after that first week and thought, you've got 6 months of this, are you sure you want to sign up for this? I'd have just taken myself off, because I'd have been like, you don't deserve to be here. And sometimes we'll have that imposter syndrome. These are units. We had like Power Edge guys, Marines, that were like, they knew every day of selection. They knew what was coming. They'd already passed it in their heads. They were machines. And I was just like trying to survive, like checkpoint to checkpoint, day to day. And so sometimes we're all guilty of having that imposter syndrome. But luckily, something in me said, just stay with it. Just stay. Because if you can get another day out of this, it's another day's experience where you can say, I was on selection for 12 days or 14 days or 21 days or, and it became like that. I never saw the end and was like, I'm getting to the end, I'm passing, I'm getting the berry. I just always thought, I'm just going to take it one day at a time. I'm going to go for the next checkpoint at a time. I'm going to try and make it to the next checkpoint. And eventually, as the days and weeks drew past, there was fewer and fewer people. So whenever it gets difficult, whenever it gets tough, you have that imposter syndrome. You think you don't deserve to be there. You think you're struggling. You just put one foot in front of the other and you just keep going. And eventually, you'll get to the other side.
Yeah, good advice. That's good advice. And again, a lot of it's mindset, isn't it? And it's like you say, you talk yourself out of it. It's not like a P company where you've got people screaming at you that want you to pack, they're driving you on, and that does help. Selection from the stories I hear and people I speak to, it's just literally that if you turn around and say, yeah, I'm done, they're not going to talk you out of it. You're on of your own choice. You're a volunteer, aren't you?
Yeah, and you bring up a good point, Chris, and there is separate kind of motivations. So one, it's screaming, shouting, everyone encouraging you on, even the people around you, and you're going to get swept along with this. Whereas there's something more intimidating about, and I always remember this Scottish DS on my selection, who just had this most non-judgmental poker face that you didn't know if you were doing well or not. You'd turn up at the checkpoint and he'd go, name, and you'd be like, Blue 57 MacLachlan staff, and he'd go, right, there's your grid. Do you know where you are? And you'd be like, yeah, here. And he'd go, off you go. And you'd leave and you'd be like, am I doing all right? Like, am I behind? Am I in front? Like, you've got, and that's worse because sometimes that'll just play on your mind and you'll be like, whereas if there was the odd one that was a bit shouty, screamy, or, you're shit or whatever, that can have like minimal impact because for anybody that's been through those environments, shouting and screaming and swearing at someone will work okay the first once or twice. After that, it will have no impact. Like I think about when my parents or that would shout and scream at me or use the wooden spoon on me or whatever. Yeah, the first few times it had impact. After that, it had none. I was numb. I was numb to it, and it's the same for soldiers.
Yeah.
So whereas when someone just looks at you and just says, "Right, off you go," that there's something worse about that because you're constantly self-analyzing, like, am I behind? Am I failing? Like, he didn't look that impressed. And normally, I impress people. I'm like a good soldier, and I'm like, nah, you're not impressing. There's nobody impressing these guys. You can be the fastest guys in the world. You'll get the same face. You can be the slowest, and you're just scraping in. You'll get the same face. And in some ways, that's quite good, because sometimes we need that. We need someone that's not judging us for being at the front or being at the back. It's just making it. Just turn up on time. Just make it. And sometimes that's good enough.
Yeah, I get you, but I mean, yeah, I understand where you're coming from. You just a little inkling would be nice, just to be like, yeah, keep on pushing. And you probably got some DS that kind of were like, look, keep cracking on, and you're doing all right. You might have got that, but yeah, certainly not like coming through basic training for your infantry units where you're being screened. And like you say, you're right, quite rightly so. You do towards the end of training for basic training. It's just another shout. You're going to get shouted at. You're just like, yeah, here it's coming. You're going to get beasted in the corridor, press ups, sit ups, whatever, stress positions and all that amazing stuff. So yeah, it's a fair point. Something intimidating about someone with a poker face, just like letting you crack on, So obviously you get through selection. What's the surreal part about turning up at Hereford, kind of? Because obviously I hear all these reports saying it's different from the Green Army. It's next level, as you'd expect from one of arguably the greatest special forces on the planet. But what's it like getting that berry and then turning up, being in Stirling Lines in Hereford and thinking, wow, what's the sketch here walking around? How did that feel and what was the atmosphere like?
Well, like in typical other military fashions, I think if I passed the end of depot. I was now a soldier. I was going to wait a unit. There's a big pass out parade. You're marching up and down. You're saluting, hats in the air, like bands and stuff. You pass selection, right? And a guy literally comes in and he goes, MacLachlan, D Squadron, chucks your berry, blah, 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 A Squadron, right, that's you, right, see, just go and report to your squadrons, see them tomorrow, well done, guys. And you just walk out the door and you're like, what? Like, I've just had the hardest 6 months of my life. There is 6% of us in this room, and that's it. And then you go to the squadron, and you're the lowest common denominator in the whole squadron. They're like, "Oh, you're the new guy? Yeah, right, okay. Yeah, just go and like sweep the hangar and stuff like that." And you're like, "What? Like, I'm a fully qualified ninja now. Like, I'm a Jedi. Like, just beam me in." And they're like, "Nah, mate, sweep the hangar." And you're like, right, Roger that. And you're like, sweep the hanger. You're like, what? What did I do? But I mean, I'm going to extreme, but you're, I'm one of the few people, I think, from what I know, that actually asked to go back to my parent unit within 3 months. And it's because of a number of different things. I joined at a bad time. I joined I joined during a time where you weren't flying out doing operations. You were kind of stuck in the UK practicing stuff, and so it was a real. It wasn't as exciting as I probably thought, and there were certain personalities within the squadron that enabled you to make your life miserable, and so. And people within the squadron I was in will know the people I'm on about, will know the atmosphere it was, but it was just a real rubbish time. And I actually had a better time in my old unit in the Royal Scots from before I left. So I asked, after 3 months, I was there, end of the day, finished sweeping the hangar. I was the last guy in. And I went out and there was a board, and the board was like PT stroke CQB. And I was like, what does that mean? So I go in to see the sergeant major. He was a great guy, actually. I'm going to see the sergeant major, and I was like, he was still in. He was like the only other guy in. I went, like, what does that mean, PT stroke CQB? He goes, just do your own PT in the morning. I was like, where about? He goes, wherever you want. And I'm like, all right. I said, what's CQB? He goes, I'll just meet at the Killing House. I went, what time? He went, just like 2. And I'm like, okay. And I walked away. Anyway, he goes, are you all right? And I came back in. I went, nah. I said, I'm not really enjoying it. I said, I want to go back to my old unit. He went, what? I said, I want to go back to my old unit. I said, I'm just not, I've had 3 months here. It's not what I thought. I want to go back to the Royal Scots. He went, right, he goes, I'll get you an interview with the OC tomorrow. And the following morning, I had an interview with the OC, and the OC said, just do me a favour. He said, stay in for 2 years, because by 2 years, you'll have a more rounded experience of what the regiment's about. You're only getting a tiny little snapshot, and it's not a very good one for all different reasons. Stay in for 2 years, and if you do want to go back, we'll send you back, blah, blah, blah. And of course, within 2 years, it was a different beast, particularly at that time. And I was lucky to join at that time, and I was lucky to join that squadron with everything that went on. But no, by that time I was staying, and I'd kind of done a full 180 where I was like, right, I'm going to stay here for the rest of my life, and probably they'll have to kick me out when I'm like 60, because this is what I signed up for. This is what I wanted to do. And it was more what we touched on earlier, was it was more about other people's perception of you rather than the job itself, which had a big bearing in it. I thought I didn't have to prove myself all over again. I'd done selection, I was here, but no, you were just starting from the bottom again, and you were probably judged harder in that squadron than in any other squadron at that time for a variety of reasons, healthy or not healthy. And so, yeah, that was it. But no, I was fortunate. I had a good time. It was a busy time back then,
Yeah, no, it's kind of, I can't obviously compare to that, but when you start the professions I've done, when you first turn up, you kind of, it's just about showing that willingness, isn't it? And the minor things, and some people don't understand it, but getting on a mop, getting on a brush, making the brews, being the first there, being on time, and it's just showing that willingness. And it's almost like a test in itself, isn't it? And you've got the people, because if you turn up and you straight away your attitude's wrong, people pick up on this, and they're like, yeah, this guy's an arse. And you're not going to get on. You're not going to be part of the team. And that's how you fit in and integrate into a team, by just showing that willingness. And I think that's across the board wherever you turn up. Obviously, probably more so being UK Special Forces and stuff. So obviously, moving through your career, I don't want to touch on stuff, and I'm sure we're more than aware that we don't touch on operations and stuff. But are there any parts of your career into before we move on to kind of after, that stand out to you? You said you was in it a busy period. Is there anything you can touch on without giving too much away?
I think during that period, we obviously, over that period, we had 9/11, we had. And we went through a period where we went from being relatively quiet, we had Northern Ireland on the scene and stuff like that, to just about everywhere. I mean, within that sort of decade. So if you look at that decade from sort of 2003 to 2013, there was the military as a whole, not just the regiment, but the military was busy. We were all over the place, and you had that thing where you almost had that operational burnout, where you went from one environment, one operation, to another, to another, to another, without coming back and doing the reset and the training and the R&R and promotional courses. You just went from job to job. And I think there was quite a bit of operational burnout there, where guys were battle fatigued. There was a lot going on. So you have to be careful what you wish for. You join up and you just want to go to war, go into battle, because that's what you train for. You don't want to do 22 years and come out and you're like, you know what, I didn't even pick up a weapon in anger. It went the other way, where you were like, I'll be quite happy if I don't get myself in another firefight again. And so, yeah, it was a busy time. There's a lot of kind of highlight operations that people will be aware about that were over those times, 2003, 2005, 2006. There was a lot going on there. And I was just lucky, I was D Squadron, and it found itself in the right place at the right time more often than not during those periods. So yeah, I was lucky to come through that part, because a lot of it's luck. You can join the military, and just because of when you join, there might not be a lot going on.
Yeah.
It was the opposite for me, and we all come to those crossroads where we make certain decisions. And so had I had a different sergeant major that went, "Oh, you want to sign off? All right, on you go, sign off, get out." I would never have experienced that, and so when we get to those crossroads, it can have quite a big impact on where we go in life. You go into the circuit, you go into being a firefighter, you end up as a paramedic. These crossroads can have quite a big impact on what happens in that trajectory for the rest of your life.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And like you said, you touch on there, and it's a very good point. I talk to a lot of veterans, obviously, as you'd expect, doing the podcast and through other stuff. And it's like, you could have joined after the Falklands, 84, and then maybe never gone anywhere other than Northern Ireland until sort of 2000. And I was fairly lucky in the time that I served that I got 6 operational tours within the 7 years that I was in. But I'm always honest about it. They weren't kinetic like what the guys did later on in 2006, Afghanistan tours and stuff like that. But it's just a period of time. Anyone that joins up would, 99.9% will go anywhere that you're sent and do the job. But it's just so happens you might not be in a busy period. There's lads now I know that are leaving, have done 8 years Royal Marines or 8 years parachute, and they've not got an operational tour just because there's nothing going on in the world that, that they can do. So you're right there. It's just the time you're in, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's a lot to do with luck. And I've always said I'd rather be lucky than good, And I mean, there's another area that we know about, the circuit. The circuit was a really busy period, and the circuit now to what the circuit was from that kind of, I don't know, 2003 even period right through to 2013. The circuit was, well, there was a lot going on. Arguably, guys would see more on the circuit than they would have in their military service. There was a lot going on. You think of the amount of IDs, contacts, like EFPs that were going on. There was a lot going on in that. So people that were in the circuit at that time, they would have saw a lot. Compared to guys that had been doing the circuit for 20 years before that, maybe never even seen a shot fired. But it was the complete opposite out there.
Yeah, it was. You're right. They're the golden. And I was lucky or unlucky enough, whichever way, to work on the circuit from 0304 to 2010, and then the anti-piracy after. And it was like a golden era of it. And I know that sounds a bit corny, but it was, And, kind of sadly, it decimated a lot of units because, why would you not want to, 22, 23 grand as a Lance Corporal in the parachute to 9-10 grand a month tax free? It was a no-brainer, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why there has to be incentives there for what you do. And I'm not saying it's cash or whatever, but they're two totally different lifestyles. If you're still serving and you see your mates that got out 6 months ago and they're driving about in flashy cars with lifestyles, you're thinking, how's that? They're like doing a similar job in the same environment but getting paid, I don't even know how many times more. But even in the regiment, you're not massively well paid. And then guys are going out, they might even be better equipped. They might even have more of a backup there, because some of the backup, you think back to Iraq and the setup that like the MOD had in Aegis and that, there was a big backup there that you probably didn't even have in the military. But it was like the Wild West. I need to send you a video clip of it's the triple car bombing in Baghdad, and it's that roundabout where the Saddam statue was pulled down. And I think it's one of the biggest car bombings in the Middle East. It's a triple car bombing. It's the cement mixer that tries to get into the hotel. Well, I'm on the 10 o'clock position on that roundabout. I was doing security for CNN, NBC News. And as I come round the roundabout, the first of the 3 car bombs goes off, blows a hole in the wall. And I've got the head of CNN in the back seat, having kittens, thinks they're going to blow up the hotel. So he's like, get out of here, get up this road. And I know the road behind me's got full embassy buildings. So I'm like, no, we're going to stay put because nobody wants to bomb a roundabout. And then the second car comes flying past us and blows up the about 100 yards behind us, lifts the back end of the car up. I'm in a B6 armoured Jeep, lifts the back end up. Now he's having kittens. He thinks they're coming for him personally. So I've got one arm round the footwell on him, and I'm doing the commentary. And I sound quite calm when I listen to the commentary afterwards. I do. I sound quite calm. I'm not. I'm like the duck on the water with the feet that are going underneath. And then the cement mixer comes through the hole and tries to get into the hotel and detonates. And it lifts our B6 armoured Jeep right off the ground, all four wheels, cracks the windscreen corner to corner. My windscreen's this thick. So at times, it's yeah. I always say when we go back to the base that night, the guys are like, "Man, we just saw it in Sky News. That was manic." I'll try and send you the video clip after this so you can see it. And it's and you can see me in the 10 o'clock position, mate. I've even got my hazards on. Like, why have I got my hazards on? Like, safety first, right? It always tickles me when I think about that. But yeah, it's one of those moments that you find yourself in, and you get that imposter syndrome. But you just think, if not me, who? And if not now, when? And so you kind of get through it. But sometimes that being calm in a storm's quite contagious. It can flow through people, and if you're calm, everybody else is. But if I'm running screaming naked for the hills, everybody's kind of following me. So yeah, I'll send you after this. You can probably add it onto this so people can see.
Yeah, I will do. For people that are watching, I'll put that in. How long is the clip? Is it?
It's only it's like a minute long, and it just shows you all the bombs going off, and you can see my car with the hazards on it just in the middle of it all, so people will be able to see what it was like. But the last one, the cement mixer, that's a belter. I think it's the biggest car bomb in the Middle East.
Wow, I'll put that in at this point now, so the people that will be watching it now. So yeah, the car bomb side of things, and I always tell a story like signing some Iraqi local nationals in at a checkpoint on the green zone when a car bomb detonated. And any other day, you remember how they used to have the US call signs on the inner checkpoints and then the local national Iraqi on the outer. Every day I used to go, or someone used to go and sign them in at the Iraqi checkpoint because they wouldn't let them through. And on this particular day, the Iraqi soldiers had let them through to the US checkpoint where I met them, and a car bomb went off at the outer checkpoint, killed 70 people, took us off our feet. Any other day, I should have been signing them in. And you're just like, wow, there was a lot of luck out there, weren't you, Colin?
Yeah, and like I say, you'd rather be lucky than good, because there was some great operators, great units that, for no fault of their own, got caught up at the wrong time, wrong place. And there was other ones that were cowboys that were getting by just by luck. So sometimes, and you did feel like that as an operator out there, it was tossing a coin. If you think Route Irish and stuff like that back in the day, it was like a, Cannonball Alley. It was, and there was that much of it. You had to be quite lucky to get through that without being in something, because you think of how many contractors we know, how many people that were on the circuit. Everybody's got a story. Everybody. So that everybody was in it.
It was that time again, wasn't it? Like, certainly I remember 2006, 2007 being, historically bad out there and stuff like that. So what was your decision? How long did you kind of do with 2-2 before you decided? Did you do your full career then and then decide to leave? Or what was your decisions and sort of career length when you decided to leave?
Yeah, I was involved in quite a high profile incident, which a lot of people will be aware of, and that made my decision easy. Up till that point, I was always going to stay in, and I was kind of earmarked for some pretty decent positions within the regiment. And then this incident happened, which it totally changed my concept of what the future looked like and how much faith I had in where I was going and who was looking after me. And so after that, I decided, right, I'm going to have to leave, and I left. And I was actually, like a lot of things, I was lucky because at that time the circuit was just kind of kicking off. This was kind of 2006 time, so the circuit was just kicking off. So I joined Pilgrims, that was doing a lot of the security stuff out there. And yeah, went into the circuit, and although it was busy in the circuit, it was more money than I'd ever seen in my life, in those days. And a lot of people, that was it. Look, I still know people that, you know, probably on the circuit now from back then, because, you know, you get used to that lifestyle. In fact, you had Des on. I was out with Des with quite a bit, and Des was always one of those that I thought he's just going to go on the circuit forever. You know, he's quite happy, he's comfortable in that environment. You know, and he was still the same. You know, Des, he's such a nice guy. Just chat to you, and I don't think people realise that kind of Sheffield steel that's behind Des. Like he is solid. You know, still probably got like 5% body fat, and
Yeah.
you know, but great times. I had some great times with Des and lots of other guys that you know, Mal Downs and stuff like that. They were all out there, and people will be aware of them. So they're good operators, good people, and people that you feel safe being around. And as we both know, not long after that period, it kind of changed, and the circuit got kind of oversaturated, a bit diluted. There was people that even, you know, there was like bouncers and stuff that were signing up, and all these Eastern Europeans that had no military experience, but were like just saw the pound signs and were coming on, and that started to reduce the quality of the circuit teams, and you saw that with contacts and stuff like that. So it became a very different place, and I was fortunate. I did a very short period on the circuit. I joined from probably about 2006 to 2010, and then thought I'd saved up enough money to put myself through university, and I left. But I always say to people, if you're going to do that job, have a plan. It doesn't matter what the plan is.
Yeah.
Buy a pub, go and buy a boat, like, or do whatever, but have a plan. Otherwise, you're stuck in that circuit, and it's not a great place to be stuck in. You know, because you get, you know, those rotations just become like, yeah, you're wishing your life away.
Well, your kind of life seems to speed up because you're literally constantly wanting to get back. But I was lucky enough to do like a lot of time back then. It were 2 month on, a month off kind of stuff, or 6 weeks on, 2 weeks off. They weren't too bad. I know now they're 3-4 months, and like you say, they became oversaturated, so they could make up their own rules and rotations, and they still know they'd get the people to do it regardless of quality, you know. And I think the biggie there as well, like you probably noticed 2010, around that time they noticed the shift, and you'll probably remember it as well, where they mixed a lot more teams with local nationals, which again, I have nothing against the Iraqi local nationals, but their standard was way below that of our standard. So when they started mixing the teams, the shift of the power, can you remember how you were protected by the US government or the British government, whichever contract you were working on, that power shifted, and sort of people were being arrested for incidents and kind of stuff like that. You'll probably remember that yourself.
Yeah, and you had a lot of high profile incidents there. You had, like, even with the piracy, you had like the Chennai Six and stuff like that, where the government on loads of different fronts sort of abandoned them, and so it became, although it was a bit like the Wild West in 2006, there was some sort of governance, there was backup, there was rules.
Who's been getting influenced in that? Yeah.
Yeah, and then during things like piracy, you had all this mad stuff where, and I didn't really do a lot of the piracy stuff, but they had stuff where like guys had wooden guns, and guys were like chucking their weapons overboard when they got to certain demarcation lines. And you'll have more experience and stories of that side than I do, but certainly you would get yourself in trouble, not because you were trying to, but because you were doing what you were told, but actually, you know, as you were crossing, you know, state lines and different waters, the rules were changing, and also changing over time, so that what you did last month wasn't the same this month, and you were ending up in the jail, and you had quite a lot of high profile cases like that. So I'm kind of glad that I left when I did, and it wasn't by any, because I'm particularly brighter than anybody else. It was luck, you know. I joined for that wee 2006, 2010, got the sort of golden era of the circuit stuff, and left when it became wild.
Yeah, it's good that you're bang on there with having a plan. I know so many guys that because they were on good money, they mortgaged themselves up to the hilt. And then when I was always in a position where I never lived beyond my means. So when I got, you know, and I'm quite honest about the incident that changed my mind. I was very lucky. RKG3 grenade threw at my vehicle, never detonated. Should have pierced through the door and would have killed me and the driver. It never went off. And that was a minor incident compared to some of the things I've been involved in. But that's what told me, right, I've had my 9 lives out here. I'm going to go and do other stuff, the anti-piracy stuff. But blokes couldn't, because they had so much debt back home. And, you know, when they got scared, they still had to come in. And there's nothing worse than going into them environments. You know, you would have probably experienced it yourself. I know I did towards the end, where I was having that feeling you get when you're flying out somewhere, you know, when you're leaving your loved ones and your family and stuff. And like you say, same as you, I kind of got wind of stuff and decided, you know, them first anti-piracy trips, you'll probably remember that, you know, I don't know whether you did them or not, where I didn't have any weapons. I had spears and petrol bombs. And what use is that against pirates with AK-47s, you know? Just insane. But yeah, no, I get where you're coming from. Have a plan. And I always had a plan that the fire service, I was going to keep trying for the fire service. And then when I got in, I had that way back home in a not proper career, but do you know what I mean? Stability. And that's obviously the same. So moving on from that kind of stuff, you know, it's no secret you're in Channel 4's Who Dares Wins and stuff like that. So how did all that kind of stuff come about? I take it this was all after the circuit and you'd been through university and decided, right, was that the route you were going to go?
Yeah, well, I hadn't really planned to do that, like a lot of things, but I thought I'll try and get myself through university. And again, this goes back to resilience. Resilience is that kind of one superpower that can help you trump anything. So when I tried to get you to university, applied, got rejected, applied to colleges to get to university, got rejected. And I got this guaranteed interview at a place called Newbattle Abbey College. Went along, got an interview, and I got a place. And I did 21 subjects. You only had to do 12. I think I did 21, and I got 21 A's. And so I thought, and not because I was particularly bright, just because I wanted to be there, you know, and I wanted to learn, and I wanted to know what I might be able to study at university, because at that point I didn't really know. And so I took history and philosophy, and I applied to universities, got rejected from them all, and eventually I got into Edinburgh. And I nearly failed my first paper because I didn't really know what they were asking. I think that it was a history paper, and it was something like, was Scotland ever conquered? And I went, no, and here's why. And they said, no, that's not how you answer a paper. And so I kind of learned what to do. And then I really just outworked the competition. So there was people at university that was far smarter than me, far brighter, more diligent, better memory retention, knew more about the subject naturally. I just outworked the competition. So whenever we had a paper, an exam, I would rehearse it like 20 times until I knew almost to the minute how much I could write. And then I just outworked the competition. So by the time I left university, at that time, I don't know about now, but at that time, I was the only student to get a first class honours degree and win all 3 academic awards. And I tell you that not because I'm bright, because you've heard me, I'm not bright, but resilience is that one thing that can help you. It can help you when you're not physically better, you're mentally capable, you know, biological. Like resilience is that one thing that can, you know, conquer a lot of things. And so that's what got me through university. And then I was just kind of doing sort of risk management jobs up in Aberdeen with oil and gas. And then I was registered as a military advisor and a stuntman because I thought that's the sort of thing I wanted to do. I always used to get annoyed watching films and people had the wetting in the wrong shoulders and their berries like helipads and stuff, and I'm like, that's an easy fix. Like I can tell them what to do, and so I did all that, and there wasn't a lot of work. There is now, but it's the same guys that have got it all covered. Back then, there wasn't a lot of work, and so I got approached about this Channel 4 show, went along, met some of the guys. At my initial interview, all the guys were there, apart from, I think, Ant Middleton. He wasn't there. But they talked about the theory of the show. So we'll leave you alone. You run it. We'll just come in and change the batteries on your stuff. And I thought, that sounds quite, you know, we've got a bit of autonomy there. It won't be a sort of Chad show. And so, yeah, I did the first couple of series. I thought they were really good. I thought they were gritty and raw and real. We took ordinary people, which is what you want, and I felt like everybody left, because we only had them for 8 days, that after those 8 days they left better in whatever capacity than what they started. And that's all you can ask for, really. And then it kind of changed a little bit as time went on with celebrity versions and all the rest of it. But I was glad I did it at the time. It was able to raise the profile, and that allows you to do other things, like the speaking, or, you know, like being able to do podcasts, or, you know, being able to, you know, be a voice for charities and mental health and stuff. So I'm always grateful for the opportunity and the platform that provided. But TV is quite a fickle industry, like anything. And so whether it's agendas or people, or, your opinion sometimes is not allowed, then it can be quite a fickle industry. But no, it helped me for in all different ways, doing the speaking and stuff, which I really love, the speaking and the workshops and stuff. Get a lot of value out of them.
Yeah, I mean, I have heard and I've read from various people that you are up there. And again, you don't strike me as the sort of person that kind of wants to blow smoke up their own arse or stuff like that. But I've read that you are one of the kind of best motivational speakers or ranked very highly. Is that something you're aware of? And
I go back to something I said really at the start of this podcast, that it's always in the eye of the beholder. It's always, you can have a really great speaker, and if it doesn't land, if it's not the messages, if it's not the style that the person who's listening or on the receiving end wants, then you're the worst speaker. Whereas it can be the opposite, So I've been in rooms where I thought that landed the sort of key messages, and I've been in other ones where, like you might get standing ovations, and then you might get like, I don't know if that was right. I don't know if it was the right. I had one recently where I turned it down. It was for L'Oreal, and I've spoken for L'Oreal before. And at this one, they said, and I'll probably get in trouble for mentioning the company and all the things, but they said, "Oh, we don't want you to mention anything to do with life or death, or anything to do with any countries or blah." And I just thought, I just can't. Like, it's gonna be really weird for me to try and tell stories of my experience without mentioning the consequences. And I think a lot of people can have preconceptions about what a military speaker is going to come across like, their attitude, or how bullish they're going to try and take over or be quite. And you probably saw that in the fire service. You went into the fire service, people might have preconceptions of what veterans will, and there's no veteran that fits in any sort of box. We're all different. So I think sometimes that can surprise people. Yeah, how I tell a story, or how I talk about the value behind some of the consequences and the learnings of that story. I don't think it's what they expect, and I wish they wouldn't have those assumptions, because they're always quite positive surprises to have sometimes. And it's quite why I quite like having briefing calls with companies, so they can see you, they can hear you, they can hear about the sort of things that you're going to talk about. We don't all stand there in our uniform and give it the Brecon 5-pointer and be like, right, do this, and you'll be brilliant. If you don't, then you'll die. We're not all really like that.
yeah, you do get the stereotypical kind of military that people do form that opinion of you, but it's good that you give you kind of motivation, because again, I'm a big believer in then a lot of experience, whether even it's 4, 5 years, 7 years, 22-year career, you can take them experiences and convert them into the civilian kind of terminology. You can, into that kind of world. But to not be able to mention life or death, which is a big part of the military, it's a big part of what you do. Not all kind of roles, but it is kind of widely accepted that you will, when you join the military, end up going to a hospitable place or unhospitable place, for whichever word you want to say, and kind of be faced with them things. But it's how you deal with them. It's how you kind of, and then those experiences you draw from, don't you? So yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to move on. Obviously, I'm conscious of the time, but I want to move on to obviously the book that's just out, The Pilgrim and stuff. So what was your kind of, you said you've had some challenges with trying to get it out. We spoke on the phone and we kind of agreed that this would be a good time to do it, because the book's out now. So yeah, please tell us about the book. Tell us about how it came about and the kind of challenges you've had with it.
So when I first wrote the book, it was when I was bored, and you'll know better than anybody, Chris, that when you're on the circuit, you spend long periods bored. Like, right, I need a hobby.
Yeah.
I need something to be able to do when I'm sitting waiting for the next, whatever I'm going to do. So I did these online courses and online degrees and stuff, and then I did this. I thought I'll just write my autobiography, and so in one 6-week stint, I just wrote my whole autobiography, and this is way back in like 2006. And then I just left it because I thought, it's down now. It's on paper. It's on record. I don't need to publish it or write it. But at least while it's fresh in my mind, I've got it on paper. And so I just put it away, and that was it. And then in 2016, was it, or 15, whenever we did the Who Dares Win show, there seemed like there might be an appetite for a book, and people were starting to write books, and I thought, I don't even know if I can write a book, like whether it's allowed. So I put it through disclosure, and disclosure is quite a it would be really simple if it was like black and white, and that's fine, and off you go, and it's quite a quick process. It's really long, and that there's not one line in the sand. It kind of moves left and right depending on the time and what's going on in the courts and who's in position. And then those people that are in that post, they change every 2 years or whatever. So 2 years later, you'll be speaking to someone else and they've got a different opinion on what you can write. So there's been lots of changes from then to now. But we're in a period where, from sort of 2016 to now, where you can write a book and you can actually write about certain things within the regiment. And so that's changed, because before it was nothing. You just like, I turned up for selection. Okay, next page. When I left the SAS, you can write anything. Now it's slowly, you can write stuff and it goes through disclosure. But again, there's still stuff that changes. So one of the things was the winged dagger. So the winged daggers become like copyright. So you can't use the winged dagger on anything, even if you've served, which is pretty weird. But then, so the publishers thought, well, you can do a photograph of a pin badge. That's not the same. And I'm like, I don't really know, guys. I'd rather just not have it. Anyway, they were like, no, you can. So we put it on the front, and then that became a thing. Like the MOD were like, no, you can't put a winged dagger on. And so it became this whole thing of, what is it that's copyright? Is it the picture of the trademark logo, or is it a photograph up? Like, what is it? And in the end, we just took it off, which delayed the book somewhat, because we had to change the cover and certain images and stuff like that. So it became a bit more drawn out. No, but I'm glad to say that, the books, the book will be out any day now. And so it's been a long process, but we're there now. And like the TV show and everything else, it provides a platform, and for other things like the mental health stuff that I like doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll put a link in the bio for the viewers, where they can get the kind of, obviously you'll be able to get it on Amazon and all good bookstores and all that stuff. But I'll add some links in and stuff. Finally, what I want to touch on, two things. Obviously, the reason and the main goal behind my podcast is, over the years, probably the same as you, Colin, sadly, we probably know lots of people that have struggled with post-traumatic syndrome, that kind of post-traumatic stress disorder, and also struggled with kind of mental health. And I know a lot of people along the way that have sadly not come out the other side and have taken their own life. So my decision was to kind of do a podcast to raise a bit of awareness. So I'd like to get someone to just add. So if you would, what would you say? We talked about this start, obviously you do your motivational speaking and stuff like that. So it was about, what advice would you give to someone that would find themselves struggling with mental health for whatever reason? What advice would you give to them?
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons why I set up Who Dares Cares, is because myself and my friend Cami, who had his own struggles with Northern Ireland, and we saw a lot of our friends that were just falling through our fingers, and it was becoming too, we couldn't catch them, and so we set up this charity to try and just help. And so I always say that everybody needs a toolkit, because there's not a kind of one size fits all for people. Because mental health is a bit like physical health. It'll kind of go up and down depending on what's going on in our life. And all we want is that when we're at the low part of that frequency, we're having our worst day and everything's coming at us, because we're only all of us, just a few consequences and circumstances away from being in a really bad rut. And all we need to do is make sure that we don't make the worst decisions at those worst times, because it's fleeting. It's a passing moment, passing hour, passing day, maybe, even through that frequency. So what we need to do is have this toolkit around us to help us not do those things at the worst possible times. So one of the things I always think about is great to have is this buddy-buddy system that we kind of take for granted in the military. A little battle buddy that whenever I'm having those moments, I can bounce off somebody. But it has to be somebody that speaks the same language, that walks a mile in my shoes, that knows that difficult day. And that's why we pair veterans with veterans, firefighters with firefighters, prison service with prison service, because they've walked a mile in each other's shoes. They know what that tough day looks like, or that rut, or the things that are going on in the head. And so they're more likely to be able to get through and speak on the same medium as the person that's going through it. They might have even had that bad day and they've come out the other side. So that's why we try and do that. So a buddy's one of them. The other thing is to realize that when we have those emotions, when we're having those sort of negative feelings, when we're having those days, that's normal. It's that we want to have those. Otherwise, we're kind of robotic. We're not having the highs and the lows. We're just kind of cruising along, unemotional, not having anything. So it's a very human thing, and it tells us that we're very much alive because we'd have to be without having these feelings. And so that when they come along, we have to have things that help. So whether we break a routine, whether we create a routine, sometimes routine helps. Sometimes saying, right, all I'm going to do is I'm going to get up, I'm going to make my bed. I'm going to, I'm going to go a walk. I'm going to get some fresh air at some stage. I'm going to spend some time with family or with friends or my battle buddy, whoever this is. We have to have a little checklist that suits us. It might be some place that takes us away from it. A place that we go where we don't have to think about anything else apart from what we're doing. Time with the kids, time with the dog, time on a golf course, time, up on a hill with nothing else to look at but the view and miles around and a brew. Maybe even with a buddy. Something that we do that we know takes us to a place where all we can think about is what's right in front of us. That's why I do a lot with the golf and that. Golf's really good for some reason because all you think about is the next shot. But you keep doing that for 4 hours until at the end of it, you realise you've come through it. And there's been difficult parts in that golf course. There's been easy parts that make you come back. But isn't that a kind of almost an epitome of life, where we have those difficult moments, we're stuck in a bunker, but we get out of it, and we finish the day, we finish the round. And whether it was good or bad, we finish it, we get through it. And there's been highs and lows, but we've shared those experiences and memories with people around us. And that's what life is. So we just need to remember that and have our own wee toolkit.
No, great advice. Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Colin. And I do kind of say similar sort of things. And it's about, I always say to people, if there's nothing worse than not having a kind of a plan or a challenge, and you kind of stagnating. And I always say to people, have a challenge, have a goal, whether that's kind of you sign up for an event, a fitness event, whether it's kind of, my big thing obviously has been the podcast. I've channeled a lot of kind of energy into that to make it work, and I will continue to do that. And I find it's a really good way of sort of channeling your energy into having a project, Is that something you agree with as well? It's about having a project.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you have those goals, and you can have big goals and small goals. Small goals are things you can do on a daily or weekly basis, and the big goals are something that the small goals help you get towards. So whether it's writing a book, creating a podcast, losing weight, getting fitter, preparing for a marathon, preparing for, a certain weight you want to lift in the gym, or getting down to a golf handicap, whatever it is that you have, goals are really important because they give us purpose. And when we lose purpose and we lose drive and something to get up for in the morning, that's when we start to deteriorate. So it's no surprise when you see people that work their whole lives, they've got all these hobbies and all that, and then they suddenly stop work and they don't have anything. Their whole life just slowly starts to deteriorate. That's not by chance or by consequence. That's because we've lost some sense of purpose and drive. And our body tells us, our body goes, well, you've no reason to live anymore. You've no reason to, get up in the morning. You've no reason to do anything. So goals are really important. And you underestimate the power of the goals that you set yourself. So it's worth spending a bit of time and sitting down and going, right, what would be the big goals? Like if I was to look in 10 years' time, what would I want? What is something I would aim towards? And then setting the little goals around that to get where you need to be. And you'll be surprised by how those goals sort of incentivize you to get up in the morning and do what you do.
No, awesome stuff. And finally, Colin, what's next on the kind of horizon for you? What have you got planned coming up?
I still do lots with video games, with Rockstar Games. I've got another couple of books that I wrote over COVID, because when COVID came along, like anything else, it was a lot of the things went, and so I thought, what can I do with my time? And so I wrote books, and so those will be in the door, ready to go when after The Pilgrim comes out. And I love the talks and workshops. And finally, my Stoic events. I created a team building company, Stoic Events, along with some pals. We've got a big area up in Scotland. We've got our boats and helis and guns and explosives, and we send people on spy missions, and I love it. And so I hope that Stoic Events kind of grows over the years to come. And there's one of the big goals for me.
No, awesome stuff. Well, it's been absolutely fantastic chatting with you, Colin. Thank you so much for sharing your life story and all the kind of experience and stuff. I know the viewers and the followers will absolutely love it. I wish you well in the future with all your endeavours. Thank you very much
Thanks
for coming
having
on, Colin.
me. Who dares wins.
Hit the ground, no sound but the wind jumped out the sky where the real work begins. Iraq heat, cold steel on the front line, security tight, walking edge of a landmine. Somali seas, deck slick with the salt, eyes sharp, never blink, never halt. Surveillance in the mist, eyes on the prize. UK streets to foreign skies, from fire calls to bare knuckle rings, still fighting demons that memory brings. Oh Kevin, tune in now, feel the truth get louder. This is the old paratrooper, no powder, no script, no mask, no lies, just facts. Mental health raw in boots or slacks, ADHD to the PTS pain. We're breaking silence, not playing games. Old paratrooper podcast, stay locked in. Stories from the edge where the healing begins. Not a saint, just a voice for the ones who never had a fucking choice. From the wire to the ward, from smoke to the dark, every scar on the soul is a battle mark. Memories haunting, can't shake the past, but together we fight, we stand steadfast. Loud engines